All right, so are you ready for this? We are diving deep today into flying cars, specifically China's Xpeng X2. Buckle up because you sent in some pretty fascinating stuff, a mix of like articles and some of our marketing materials. So it seems like we are really on the cusp of something big.
Yeah, it definitely feels like it. Your sources really get at the heart of it, too. Is this all hype, or is this a real revolution in how we get around? And what does it tell us about where China's going in the world of tech?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we've all seen the pictures, right? This X2, it looks sleek and everything, but they're calling it an octocopter. 8 motors. So is it more drone than car?
It's definitely kind of blurring those lines, I think. Think of it like a high-tech electric drone you can sit in, designed for kind of short trips. One of the specs you sent was the flight time, only 25 minutes. That's kind of a key limitation, right? Especially compared to some of the other eVTOL prototypes out there. Those are aiming for much longer ranges. So it seems like Xpeng is betting more on like quick hops, over traffic, not replacing airplanes just yet.
Okay, interesting. Their marketing stuff really plays up that transformation, though. Wheels folding in, rotors popping out. I mean, it feels very Jetsons, but it also kind of feels like we've seen this flying car thing promised before.
Right, and that's the big difference here. Decades of concepts and prototypes. But the X2 actually works. They've done thousands of test flights. This isn't just some flashy prototype, but making it commercially viable, well, that's a whole other challenge.
Yeah, good point. Let's talk about that viability. They're pushing this whole idea of taking off from your driveway, right? Avoiding traffic completely. I mean, is that even realistic?
That's where the whole VTOL concept comes in, vertical takeoff and landing. No runways needed, at least in theory, but it's not as simple as like clearing some space in your backyard. We're talking about basically a complete rethink of how we use urban airspace.
So skyports aren't just a sci-fi trope then. Like our cities really might have landing pads on rooftops and parking garages. I mean, that kind of infrastructure just seems massive.
Exactly, and that's kind of what Xpeng's banking on, a whole ecosystem built around this tech. But it raises a ton of questions, like who regulates all this airspace? How do you handle the noise pollution over densely populated areas?
Oh, and that noise pollution, good point. I imagine a sky full of these things could get pretty loud. What about the tech itself? Some of the articles mentioned autonomous flight, using AI and sensors, so like how much control would a driver even have?
That's one of the most interesting aspects for sure, and potentially one of the most controversial ones. They're using a system called lidar. Essentially, it's like laser-based radar to create a real-time 3D map of everything around the vehicle.
Okay, I think LiDAR was mentioned in some of the articles, yeah. Something about laser-based radar, I remember that. So what role does LiDAR play in this whole autonomous flight system?
Well, it's crucial for building that 3D map that the AI uses to navigate. It's like giving the X2 eyes that can see in every direction, constantly scanning for obstacles, mapping the environment.
So it's building a real-time understanding of its surroundings, then feeding all that data to the AI, and the AI makes decisions about the safest and most efficient flight path. I mean, it sounds incredibly complex.
Oh, it is. And that brings up some questions about the level of trust we're putting in this AI. Now, their marketing stuff highlights all the backup systems and fail-safes, of course. But your research also digs into some potential vulnerabilities, like sensor malfunctions, software glitches, even cybersecurity threats.
Yeah, that's a pretty sobering thought if we're really talking about autonomous vehicles in the air, but the stakes are even higher than on the ground. So what are regulators doing to address these safety concerns?
Well, that's going to be a huge hurdle for Xpeng. And for any company getting into this space, we're going to see a whole new set of regulations and certifications, probably much stricter than anything we have for like traditional aircraft.
Makes sense. And what about the practicalities of actually flying one of these things? How far can this X2 travel on a single charge? That 25-minute flight time, it still seems pretty limiting.
It is, and that's another area where Xpeng is facing challenges. They're really pushing the boundaries of battery technology. But for now, at least, the X2 seems best suited for those short trips within a city, not for like cross-country travel or anything.
So we're back to that vision of a transformed city, I guess. Skyports integrated into buildings, designated air corridors for flying car traffic. I mean, it's an exciting idea, but it also raises a ton of logistical questions.
Yeah, and not just logistical. Your sources also touch on the social and environmental impacts. Think about noise pollution over residential areas, privacy concerns with all these cameras constantly scanning from above, even just the visual impact of these vehicles on our skylines.
Yeah, it's like a whole new layer of complexity gets added to urban planning. We're not just talking about traffic flow anymore. We're talking about managing an entirely new dimension of transportation.
Exactly, and it's not just about government regulation either. We're going to need collaboration between cities, tech companies, communities, to create a system that's safe, efficient, and sustainable.
Yeah, sustainability, that's a key point. Okay, so the X2 itself is electric, but what about all the energy required to manufacture these vehicles, build the infrastructure, manage this complex air traffic control system?
Yeah, that's where the full environmental picture gets a lot more complicated. There's a lot of research and development going on, though, around sustainable materials, energy-efficient charging systems. They're even exploring renewable energy sources to power these skyports.
It sounds like we're barely even scratching the surface here of what a flying car future really entails. We're not just swapping out cars for flying machines, we're reimagining how our cities function, how we interact with our environment, even how we think about personal transportation.
And that's what makes all of this so fascinating. The X2 is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. It's forcing us to confront questions about urban design, technological ethics, our relationship with the sky itself.
So we talked about the big picture of flying cars and what Xpeng wants to do, but now I want to get under the hood, so to speak. What are the technical nuts and bolts that make this thing fly?
Well, it's this fascinating blend of really cutting-edge aviation tech and electric vehicle tech. One thing that really jumps out from your research is the complexity of those 8 rotors, the whole octocopter design. They're not just powerful, they can tilt independently for really precise control during takeoff, landing, and even hovering.
Wow, so this isn't just about going up and down then. We're talking like maneuverability, navigating tight spaces, maybe even changing direction midair?
Exactly. Think about those potential skyports we were talking about before. In those crowded cities, agility is going to be key. And it's not just the rotors either. The X2 relies on this whole network of sensors, cameras, and lidar to see its surroundings.
Yeah, lidar, that was mentioned in some of the articles. I remember it being described as like laser-based radar. So what role does lidar play in this whole autonomous flight system?
It's crucial for creating that 3D map that the AI uses to navigate. You can almost think of it like giving the X2 eyes that can see in every direction, constantly scanning for obstacles and mapping the environment.
So it's building this real-time understanding of its surroundings, feeding all that data to the AI, which then makes decisions about the safest and most efficient flight path. Man, it sounds incredibly complex.
Oh, it is. And that's one of the things that raises questions about how much we're trusting this AI. Now, the marketing materials highlight all the backup systems and fail-safes they have in place. But your research also digs into some potential vulnerabilities. Things like, sensor malfunctions, software glitches, even cybersecurity threats.
Yeah, that's a little sobering to think about. I mean, if we're talking about autonomous vehicles up in the air, the stakes are even higher than with self-driving cars on the ground. So what are regulators doing to address these safety concerns?
That's going to be a huge hurdle for Xpeng. And any company trying to get into this space, I think we're going to see a whole new set of regulations and certifications, probably a lot stricter than anything we have for traditional aircraft.
Makes sense. What about some of the practicalities of flying this thing? Like how far can this X2 actually travel on a single charge? That 25-minute flight time, it still seems kind of limiting for getting around.
Yeah, it is, and that's another area where Xpeng is facing some big challenges. They're pushing the limits of battery technology, but for now, the X2 really seems best suited for those short trips within a city, not for any kind of cross-country travel.
So we're kind of back to that vision of the city transformed then. Skyports integrated into buildings, designated air corridors for flying car traffic. It's exciting to think about, but it also raises a lot of logistical questions.
It does, and not just logistical ones. Your sources also talked about the social and environmental impacts. You've got noise pollution over residential areas, privacy concerns with all these cameras constantly scanning from above, even just like the visual impact of these vehicles on our skylines.
It's like we're adding this whole new layer of complexity to urban planning. We're not just talking about traffic flow on the ground anymore. It's about managing an entirely new dimension of transportation.
Exactly, and this isn't just about government regulations either. We're going to need some serious collaboration between cities, tech companies, and communities to create a system that's safe, efficient, and sustainable.
Right, sustainable. That's a key point. I mean, the X2 itself is electric, so that's good. But what about all the energy required to manufacture these things? Build the infrastructure, manage this whole air traffic control system.
That's where the full environmental picture gets a lot more complicated. There's a lot of research and development happening, though, looking at sustainable materials, energy-efficient charging systems, even exploring renewable energy sources to power those skyports.
It seems like we're just barely scratching the surface here of what a flying car future really entails. It's not just about swapping out our cars for flying machines. We're talking about reimagining how our cities function, how we interact with our environment, even how we think about personal transportation.
I think that's what makes it so fascinating. The X2 is just one piece of this much larger puzzle, and it's a puzzle that's forcing us to confront some big questions. Questions about urban design, technological epics, even our relationship with the sky itself.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, the tech specs, the broader implications of flying cars. But now I kind of want to shift gears and focus on the company behind the X2, Xpeng. They've gone from electric car startup to flying car innovator in like just over a decade. What's driving that kind of ambition?
Well, their journey is a really interesting case study, I think. In China's overall tech strategy, I mean, they're not just aiming to catch up with the West anymore. They want to leapfrog ahead. And Xpeng is playing right into that, pushing boundaries in a way that's really capturing global attention.
Yeah, their first car, the G3, hit the market back in 2018. But it sounds like, from what you said, it sounds like they weren't just trying to build another electric car. They were already incorporating that advanced tech we talked about, things like driver assistance systems, over-the-air software updates.
Yeah, they were essentially building smart cars right from the start. And I think that really laid the groundwork for their move into flying cars. It's not just some random leap. It's a very deliberate extension of their focus on innovation and the future of mobility.
So creating Xpeng Aero, their dedicated flying car division, that was like a logical next step for them.
Exactly. And they've been attracting some serious talent, investing heavily in R&D. They're clearly not just dipping their toes in the water here. They're going all in on this vision.
But how realistic is that vision? I mean, really, are they actually going to be selling flying cars to people anytime soon? Our sources mentioned regulatory hurdles, safety testing, scaling production. That's a pretty long list of challenges.
It is, and there's definitely some healthy skepticism out there. But you have to admit, Xpeng has already accomplished a lot. Thousands of test flights, partnerships with some major aviation companies. They even have government backing.
Wait, government backing? So the Chinese government is actively supporting this whole flying car venture.
They are, and that's actually a pretty crucial factor. China sees this as a strategic industry, a chance to kind of dominate this new technological frontier. It's about national prestige, economic growth, pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
So this is way bigger than just Xpeng then. It's about China's place in the future of tech. But what about the practical implications for China itself? I mean, their cities are already dealing with terrible traffic. Wouldn't adding flying cars just make everything even more chaotic?
That's a valid concern for sure, but from the research, it seems like they see flying cars as a potential solution, not just another problem. It's about creating this new layer of transportation, maybe eating some of that congestion on the ground, and potentially opening up all these new avenues for travel and commerce.
It's a pretty fascinating gamble. Is there anything in the research about when Xpeng actually plans to launch this thing, bring the X2 to market?
They've talked about a limited release within the next few years, but there are still so many unknowns. Regulatory approvals are a major hurdle, and then there's the whole question of public acceptance. Imagine the shift in mindset that it's going to take for people to actually embrace flying cars as a way to get around.
It's almost like we're talking about a societal paradigm shift here. If Xpeng pulls this off, it could trigger this domino effect, with other companies, other countries scrambling to catch up.
And that's what makes this whole story so compelling. It's not just about some cool new gadget. It's about the potential transformation of our cities, our relationship with technology, maybe even our perception of what's possible.
Well, you've definitely given me a lot to think about. The X2, Xpeng's ambition, China's whole tech strategy. It's all kind of connected in this way that's both really exciting and a little bit daunting.
I think it's a good reminder that we're living in this era of unprecedented technological change. Things that used to be science fiction are becoming reality faster than we can even imagine.
Yeah, and that's what makes these deep dives so valuable. Thanks to your expertise, I think we've really gone beyond just the headlines here and explored the nuances of this whole story.
It's been my pleasure. It's these kinds of conversations that help us make sense of the world, especially as it's changing so fast.
Well said. And to you, our listener, thank you for taking this deep dive with us. We hope you found it insightful, thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit mind-building. Until next time, keep exploring and keep looking